All right, if you spent any time at all around software development, you've definitely heard someone say it, right? Oh, just run it in Docker. But what is Docker, really? And why is it suddenly everywhere? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down today. Let's get into it.
Okay, so to really get Docker, we have to start with the problem it was born to solve. And it all comes down to this one infamous phrase. You know the one. We've all been there, right? A developer builds something amazing, it works like a charm on their own computer, but then the second they try to share it or push it to a server, bam, it just breaks.
So what's going on here? Well, this whole "it works on my machine" thing is what we call an environment mismatch. The culprit? It's usually something tiny. The other computer might have a slightly different OS version, or maybe it's missing a specific library, or the configuration is just a little bit off. And these seemingly small differences, oh man, they can cause massive headaches and just burn through hours and hours of your time.
And this is exactly where Docker swoops in to save the day. Think of it like this. Docker is a platform that lets you package up your application with everything it could possibly need to run. We're talking the code itself, all the right libraries, the specific system tools, the whole shebang, all bundled into this single neat little unit. And that unit is called a container.
And here's the magic trick. Once your app is inside a Docker container, it will run the exact same way everywhere. Seriously. Your laptop, your coworker's laptop, that random test server, or way up in the cloud, it doesn't matter. The environment isn't something you worry about anymore because it's now packed right in there with the app. You get perfect consistency every single time.
Okay, I know this can still sound a little abstract, right? So probably the best way to really wrap your head around what Docker is doing is with a fantastic real-world analogy.
I want you to think about actual physical shipping containers. You know, those big metal boxes you see on cargo ships and trains? Well, believe it or not, Docker containers for software are based on that very same idea.
So what's the big deal with a shipping container? It's all about one word: standardization. Think about it. It doesn't matter what's inside one of those metal boxes. It could be furniture, it could be food, it could be brand new electronics, but on the outside, they all look the same. They have the same size, the same fittings, and that means any ship, any train, or any crane can pick them up and move them around without ever needing to know what's inside. Docker does that exact same thing, but for your code.
Okay, so how do we actually get our code into one of these software shipping containers? You might think it's super complicated, but the process is actually surprisingly simple.
So, it really breaks down into a few steps. First, you just write your app like you normally would. No changes there. Next, you create a special little text file. It's called a Docker file, and you can just think of it as a recipe. It lists all the ingredients, the libraries, the settings, and the instructions for your app. Then, you tell Docker to build that recipe, and it creates what's called an image. An image is basically a perfect frozen snapshot of your app and everything it needs. And finally, you tell Docker to run that image, and that running, living version, that is your container. And honestly, getting it all up and running can be as simple as typing one single line into your terminal. This one command here tells Docker, hey, run my app and make it available for me to use. That's it. Forget those long, complicated setup guides. It just works.
Okay, at this point, some of you might be thinking, hang on a second, isn't this just a virtual machine, a VM? And you know what? That is a fantastic question, a really common one. But there's a huge fundamental difference that makes containers way, way more efficient. Here's the deal. A virtual machine is like building an entire separate house for every single guest you have over. It has to bring in its own foundation, its own walls, its own roof, a whole separate operating system for every app. It's super heavy and can take minutes to get going. A Docker container, though, it's more like giving each guest their own room inside your existing house. It shares the main foundation, the host operating system, which makes it unbelievably lightweight and fast. We're talking startup times in seconds, not minutes. It's a huge difference.
So when you combine that lightweight speed with that whole standardization idea we talked about, well, you start to see why Docker is such a game changer. It brings some massive benefits to the table that have totally transformed how we build and ship software.
For starters, you get that incredible portability we mentioned. It just runs anywhere. You get that all-important consistency, which means you can finally say goodbye to the works on my machine nightmare. You get isolation, so different apps can't mess with each other. You get crazy efficiency, since they use way fewer resources than VMs. And all of that makes it a breeze to scale things up and launch tons of copies of your application.
And just to be clear, this isn't some niche little tool for a handful of people. Docker is used by
Well, pretty much everyone. We're talking from solo developers working on a passion project, all the way up to the absolute biggest names in tech.
You've heard of Netflix, right? They use Docker to run all the little microservices that make their giant streaming platform work. Spotify? Yep, they use it for their backend systems to handle all that music. And for you, as a developer, it's amazing for just spinning up a fresh, perfect development environment for a new project. One command, and you're ready to code.
So let's tie this all together with a nice bow. When you boil it all down, Docker's just that, a shipping container for your code. It's the tool that makes your software lightweight, totally portable, and completely, reliably consistent no matter what.
So now you've got a handle on what one container can do. But what about when your app is more complex? What if it needs a few containers all working together, like a web app in one and a database in another? Well, that's where things get really interesting. And in our next explainer, we're going to look at a tool called Docker Compose that makes that whole process super simple. For now, though, I'll leave you with this to chew on. Think about the stuff you work on every day. It could be a big, complex app, a turny little script you wrote, or even a whole database. What's one thing, just one thing, that you could pop into a container and make your life a whole lot easier?